What's up, everybody? It's Mr. Souter. It's A Push at the Loft, and we are rocking with you on a Wednesday. All right, so today, what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about one option that I want you to use for like studying. I think it'll be extremely helpful. You can add to your notes, whatever. It's just a good way. Besides the jocks videos, besides these videos or whatever, it's a good way to get caught up. And it's actually made by the College Board using teachers from around the country. All right, so I put the link to this link to this playlist on Schoology a couple of days ago, and it's basically taking you through. It's reviewing for you like key things, key time periods, and things of that nature. They go pretty long, so you can kind of like skip around, or if you got nothing else to do, take a look. But just them talking through causes and effects, and that these are people with the College Board. You can be assured that it will be helpful. It'll be good information. All right. So this is like period 3. I would look at periods 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, the ones that the DBQ could be over in the next 10 days. Very, very useful tool. I cannot emphasize that enough. All right. The other thing is make sure that you have the emails coming from the College Board. If you need help with that, let me know, or contact Ms. Fairbach. Also, make sure you're ready to go on test day. Looking at that guide, do you have what you need? All right. So as we get down to the end stages here, make sure you take care of that. All right. Today, I'm trying to make these quicker, not like these 15, 16-minute long videos, because uh, it's just, I think it's more beneficial to you if they're like more short spills or whatever. And then any questions you have, you can let me know. All right. So real quick, I wanted to look through some of the period 5 study guide. Period 5, of course, goes 1844 to 1877, which includes Manifest Destiny, the Civil War, and Reconstruction. So, three things there that have a huge impact on the future of our nation. And you can bet that there's a good chance to be tested. All right. Concept 5.1 is the idea of manifest destiny. All right. So what you have are two immigrant groups, Irish and the Germans. They have some differences. All right. And remember, this comes from the Jocks videos too. So if I'm talking too fast, you've got questions, you can look at the Jocks video too if you're sick of hearing my voice. All right. So the Irish and the Germans have different experiences as they come over. The Irish have the potato famine as their pull factor, or their push factor, excuse me, bad human geography info there. Their push factor was the potato famine. Poor, generally Catholic. They tended to settle in the East Coast, the urban areas, and in the North because that's where the jobs were. All right. They don't settle as much in the South. They're a source of cheap labor for factory workers. Indeed, slave owners will often use them as an example of like you have your form of slavery in the North too. So like the whataboutism, like slave owners, like what about we treat our slaves better and you treat your immigrant workers. All right. Nativist backlash. And by the way, that's a ridiculous argument. I mean, they weren't treated well, but they were paid at least. All right. But they also dealt with the nativist backlash, the Know Nothing Party, other groups that wanted to protect America for Americans. And so they did face some backlash there. All right. Germans, revolutions in the 1840s have failed, pushed a lot of Germans to the New World, the United States. They're wealthier when they come over compared to the Irish. They're Protestant, generally speaking. They tended to move inland, especially the Midwest. Like I said a few days ago, like in Cincinnati, if you look at that, I mean, the evidence of German um, immigrations everywhere in this area. All right. Um, over the Rhine, like we talked about, over the Rhine, like that was the German area, and that little creek that was over the bridge that was going over the Rhine, which was one of the most influential rivers in Germany. So even like in the names of the areas of Cincinnati, you can see that influence. They still suffered nativist backlash. There were riots and anti-immigrant riots in Cincinnati in the 1840s and 1850s as well. All right, Louisville had some instances, easy for me to say, with the Germans, German immigrants. All right, so nativism, reasons for it, they took jobs from Native Americans. They were afraid of outvoting Native Americans. They were a threat to the culture. Many were Roman Catholics, and so they saw like whether you loyal to the Pope or to the president. So there's all these um, erroneous conclusions met or erroneous conclusions that nativists come to, like that they would be more loyal to the Pope than they would necessarily the country, so they couldn't be trusted. All right, the Know Nothing Party, like they were one of the influential groups, advocated for immigration restrictions. Um, America is becoming ethnically and culturally diverse. Irish and German traditions find their way into the United States culture. So, like with Germany, you had like the Christmas tree, O Tannenbaum, as they said, as the Christmas carol goes, O Christmas tree, which I will now sing now. Just kidding, not gonna sing. All right. Manifest destiny. Nativist ideas go hand in hand with enthusiasm for territorial expansion. Not terrorist. Struggling speaking today. All right. Territorial expansion. Enthusiasm is based upon like more land means more places to grow your crops. If you're the South, more money. All right. More room to settle. Um, there's economic profit to be had. There's also the belief in the idea of manifest destiny, that it was God's will that we expand from the East Coast to the West Coast. And so they went forward confident that it would happen, and it did. As new territories are admitted into the Union, slavery is going to become a central issue. Like I told you all when we went over this earlier in the year, as we added states, it always became free or slave, free or slave. And that balance starts to become unsettled, and it's eventually going to lead help lead to the Civil War. All right. Westward expansion. Federal government encouraged westward settlement. All right. The Homestead Act, 1863. You settle an area for so long, you get that land for very cheap. All right. The Pacific Railway Act, making like kind of the beginnings of the Transcontinental Railroad. All right. So making railways easier to produce. All right. That's going to play a role. That's going to encourage westward settlement. Decline of the buffalo population. There's impact of that. As we clear out the railroads, they start taking out the buffalo. By 1880s, there's like 86 buffalo left when there had been millions decades before. Overuse of the land, overuse of the soil, kind of leads to the Dust Bowl. The 1930s kind of leads to some other areas of, just the land didn't hold up. Locusts overtook it. It was a rough thing. They caused a lot of migration from like Oklahoma and all those areas west to California, especially during the Great Depression era. All right, with the Okies, as you will. All right, moving west, Grapes of Wrath. Had a moment there, paused. Um, Sand Creek Massacre, Battle of Little Bighorn. Native Americans did fight for their land. All right, Native Americans were expected to assimilate into white society and move to reservations. That's part of the Dawes Act. That part of like assimilating Native Americans, Americanizing them into good citizens and all those things. All right, and trying to de-emphasize their native traditions, which was unfortunate. Mexican American War, the Manifest Destiny War. Don't get it confused with the Spanish American War, which was the imperialism war. Wilmot Proviso, David Wilmot, a congressman from Pennsylvania, says, "Hey, let's add this territory, but say slavery can't be involved." It never goes to vote because the South is not about that life at that time. Compromise of 1850. California is admitted as a free state. No slave trade in Washington, D.C. Popular sovereignty. And rest of territory on slavery issue, the people will vote. And then stricter fugitive slave laws. The last two are kind of the what the South gets from it. The first two are what the North gets from it. The Ostin Manifesto are challenges to territorial expansion. Ostin Manifesto said, "Hey, let's buy Cuba from Spain, and if they don't want to sell it to us, let's fight them." And then the Gadsden Purchase, all right, that Jimmy Fallon sketch that kind of filled in the rest of the Southwest, all right. So that kind of helped the Manifest Destiny. The Austin Manifesto does not happen. The Gadsden Purchase does happen. Attempts at compromise. We already talked about the Compromise of 1850. The Fugitive Slave Law sparks controversy in the North. Northerners didn't want to have to comply with, like sending escaped slaves back south. That wasn't something that they wanted to do. And so the South had these personal liberty laws and vigilance committees. Not the South, the North had these passed to kind of protect escaped slaves. All right. And it became unlawful to protect escaped slaves. if Southerners went up to get their slaves back. It was a very dicey situation. The next controversy that comes, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, huge opposition in the North, gave Southern an opportunity to expand slavery via it repeals the Compromise of 1820 because it potentially opens up slavery north of the 3630. People would vote on it. All right, and so this leads to Bleeding Kansas, where people from both sides go into the territory and they fight over it. John Brown hacks a family to death. All right, it's a violent times. There's some historians that argue that the Civil War began in Kansas during this time period. All right, that's not a well held belief, but there's historians that have made that argument. All right, Dred Scott versus Sanford, 1857. African Americans are not citizens, according to this ruling by Roger Taney, who was a Marylander, aka from a slave state. He's the Chief Justice at this time. He wrote the majority opinion. I don't know why I did the finger quotes there. Slaves are property and cannot be taken away without due process, according to this ruling, and Congress cannot ban slavery. So the Missouri Compromise was null and void. All right, so it takes all that away. It's a very unpopular decision in the North, and the South thinks that justice has truly been done. All right, so the breakdown of compromise. John Brown hopes to spark a slave revolt in 1859 by seizing the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry. South is outraged, and one of the immediate causes of secession, it's that they can no longer be trusted, that the North is arming and they're going to be violent, all right, and towards the South. And so now it's becoming a thing where, hey, we can't live together. We need to separate. It's the end of the second party system. The Whig Party collapses over debates over slavery, and the Republican Party rises, as will Abraham Lincoln. Economic, demographic, cultural. I feel like we've talked about that. If you got any questions on that, let me know. All right, but economy, North, industrially based. South, I mean, it's going to be more agricultural. Demographic, the North has a lot more immigrants. The South has more African Americans as slaves, and then English, mostly English or old time families or whatever. Unless you get into the Appalachians, where it's more Scots Irish, but that's beyond the point. All right, cultural, they started to develop differently as well. Going on here, how 1840s, 1850s abolitionists. I said I was going to make this video short. I am not, but we're getting through it. Even in the 1840s and 1850s, abolitionists remained a minority in the North. The North gradually became much more visible and vocal. The abolitionist movement did. William Lloyd Garrison was one of the founders of the anti-slavery movement and the abolitionist movement, and published The Liberator, Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe, which sold a ton of copies in the 1850s about life of slaves. My Old Kentucky Home is actually about like a slave being sold down the river, which is kind of the plot of Uncle Tom's Cabin. All right. David Walker, there's calls for violence, for the actual outbreak of violence, that slavery needs to be overthrown violently. Nat Turner Rebellion, John Brown, things like that. All right. The pro-slavery argument by George Fitzhugh and John C. Calhoun is that it's biblical. They're treated better than their industrial workers in the North, their factory workers in the North, and that it is a positive good. It's not just economic necessity; it is a positive good. John C. Calhoun says that. Let's see here. We talked about that already. The Civil War. Usually, they don't talk much about the battles or the victories or anything like that. I would be surprised if you saw that, especially this year with the limited scope of the question. All right. The course of the war, basically the South secedes in 1861, have some brilliant victories in 1861-62. Where you could see it is about Lincoln's abolitionist move from a war to preserve the Union to abolition, which in 1861 he says, I don't want to end slavery. If I can have the Union back and not end slavery, let's do that. We just don't want it to go into the territories. By 1863, he's issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed 0 slaves, but it allowed African Americans to join the Union Army. And then finally in 1860, well, it kind of like announced the intention that they were going to end slavery. I mean, everybody knew at that point that slavery wasn't going to exist after the war. Even those in the border states where the Emancipation Proclamation strictly excluded at that time. All right. So it did strengthen the moral cause of the North. By the end of the war, it's the Civil War amendments. The 13th Amendment ended slavery. The 14th Amendment granted or defined what citizenship was. The 15th Amendment granted the rights to vote. And unfortunately, those rights would be um, put to the test for hundreds of years, or not hundreds, 100 years up until the civil rights movement in the 1960s, and there's still issues today with that. But the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are passed during Reconstruction. If we would have done Reconstruction better, maybe some of the heartache of the 20th century would not have taken place. But it was what it was. Wartime Reconstruction, Lincoln had this idea that, hey, we're going to be lenient towards the South. We're going to welcome them in as brothers who were errant in their ways, and now we're welcoming them back. And then he's assassinated. And so the radical Republicans in Congress take over. It's a little bit more judgmental. The military reconstruction comes in, a lot harsher, but African Americans are able to get elected to the Senate, become governors, vote during that time period. So those are successes. But as soon as Reconstruction ended with the Compromise of 1877, those gains were pretty much gone. Okay, and so the Republican Party kind of sells out the South. They're Southern Republicans by making this compromise of 1877. They get the presidency, and the Democrats say, okay, we're not going to dispute the election. You get the presidency, but you're moving the military out of the South. And they do, and Jim Crow laws become the rule of the day, which leads to the civil rights movement of the 1960s, 1950s, 1960s, etc. All right, the Jim Crow laws really limited African American rights. It was a institutionalization. There we go, of like an unequal playing field. Plessy versus Ferguson codifies it in 1898. Separate but equal. Facilities are legal. Legalizes segregation. All right. So all this other stuff has to do with Reconstruction. Take a look at it. I think there's a decent chance that you could see this stuff again. All right. Know the successes of the radical Republicans, and then know the Civil War amendments. Those could be evidence in a lot of different questions that you could be asked. All right. So make sure you pay attention to that. So what's going to take place today is I'm going to post another DBQ. I'm going to need a context, a thesis, and then like an outline. Just this is an overall outline of how you would answer that question. Okay, so you're going to have your context, your thesis, and then what your body paragraphs would look like. Okay, so remember 5 documents. Remember that rubric we went over, taking a look at that, taking all those things into account. It will not be due until Friday. All right, and then Friday I will post another DBQ where we'll be able to practice. And like I'm saying, scrimmage with some of these. Take 45 minutes and see what you come up with and see how far you get. Can you get the question done? That's what it's going to take, all right, to be as prepared as you possibly can be on May 15th. I'm not saying spend all your time with this class. I know you all, especially with your all's course load, that you all have a lot, but it's just a situation where you do have to spend some time practicing, okay, if you want to be at your optimum level when the test time comes. All right, anything I can do, let me know. I'm here for you guys. Have a great Wednesday. Peace out. I'll see you soon. See you later. All those things. All right. Still a bad. Let's stop it.